This is Block 9, The Liberal Establishment, Part 7, Vietnam, with the section beginning Ngo Dinh Diem. Ngo Dinh Diem was the corrupt anti-communist leader of South Vietnam. That, if you remember, Vietnam was divided at the 17th parallel between a communist North Vietnam and an anti-communist South Vietnam. This guy here, Ngo Dinh Diem, is the leader of the anti-communist South Vietnam. He is not he's not an effective leader, really, but he's the best he's the best anti-communist that Vietnam has. So he's kind of the guy that does that job. American aid was promised to Diem if he had instituted some democratic liberal reforms, land reform, government reform, tax reform, etc., etc., that the United States, they obviously wanted South Vietnam to be anti-communist, but they also wanted South Vietnam to kind of be an example of democracy and liberality and freedom and equality and things like that. However, Diem was, he knew that the more liberal reforms that he instituted, the less and less power that he himself would have, and so he was very, very unwilling to kind of do these reforms at any pace that the Kennedy administration and the Eisenhower administration before him wanted to be done. And he constantly he refocused American eyes. He kept saying, reform will be possible once the communists are defeated. That communists were infiltrating South Vietnam. We can go back. That the line is here, and that communist forces known as the Viet Cong, communist North Vietnamese, were constantly crossing that barrier and slipping into the population of South Vietnam. Viet Cong were slipping through the Laotian border, from the Cambodian border. That Ngo Dinh Diem constantly said, he refocused American eyes and minds away from his own corruption and his own, inability to lead, by saying, there's more and more communists in the country. I have to spend more and more time trying to fight them. We need help, we need help, we need help. The South Vietnamese Army, the ARVN, ARVN, the Army of the Republic of Vietnam, was not able to successfully stem this tide of units that was communist units known as the Viet Cong, VC, or Charlie, that was coming into the country. So Ngo Dinh Diem begged the United States for help. Kennedy took the first fateful step and sent 15,000 American personnel to Vietnam to serve as advisors to ARVN, the Army of the Republic of Vietnam. That they were not they were combat troops, but they were not to be deployed in combat in Vietnam. Their only role, as you can see in the picture, was to train South Vietnamese students. But the American Army soon realized that the South Vietnamese Army had a long way to go, and that unless they reported back to their commanders that unless the United States sent actual combat forces, the South Vietnamese Army would not be able to ever fight off the communist threat. So the Army said to Kennedy, if you want the South Vietnamese Army to succeed, you have to send the American Army in, not only to train. First it was to train them, but after that it became the South Vietnamese Army will never survive the Viet Cong, let alone the Army of North Vietnam, without American support. Kennedy held off. He said, no, I'm not sending ground troops, combat troops to Vietnam. And Diem kept, asking for them, and Diem kept not instituting the reforms that Kennedy insists that he do to get more and more American support. And finally, Kennedy just grew a little sick and tired of him. And he backed and got behind a coup of other army officers that wanted to replace Ngo Dinh Diem. And Diem was assassinated with an American backing, and was replaced with someone that Kennedy hoped would take Vietnam in a more liberal, free direction, but it was not to be. Diem was actually the best that South Vietnam actually had. That the people who replaced Diem, constantly, there was always turnover, this person, that person, no one could ever keep them straight in the United States. They proved just as corrupt, just as authoritarian, just as despotic, just as unfree as Diem was, and usually they were worse. So this assassination really did nothing for American policy, made the U.S. look bad. That, the United States president approved a measure killing the head of state of another country, and that's quite a step. And then in the end, what happened was, since the United States was defending South Vietnam, they found themselves defending a corrupt regime with very little support in the country, just because it was anti-communist. But because it was anti-communist, that was enough for Kennedy and then his successors to support it.